Hey there. What you're about to watch is a compilation of all of my work from the Metroid Month of 2020. This is all 5 of those reviews, all spliced together. Their intros and outros have been cut, a new Patreon outro at the end of this video. I just wanted a nice, clean way to be able to enjoy the entirety of that marathon all at once. Without any further delay, hope you enjoy.
Hello.
Alright, I guess that's a thing we'll be doing for these reviews. Cool. I know some call me Johnny did it first, but I couldn't resist. Of all the video game franchises out there, there are a few that hold a more special place in my heart than others. Stuff like The Legend of Zelda or Sonic the Hedgehog, things I grew up with. But there was one franchise that I didn't get into until my later teen years, but I was enraptured the moment I stepped foot into this universe that I had in front of me. Space pirates, biologically engineered weapons, exploration, discovery, and impossible odds, all stacked against one bounty hunter. This is, of course, the Metroid series, and starting this year, I'm going to be dedicating every month of October to this franchise. This year, we're going to be tackling the first 5 games in the main storyline in order of their release. Not going over the remakes, ports, or the Prime series just yet, but we will get to those in the years to come. As for now, welcome to my first ever Metroid Month. So let's kick things off by looking at the game that started it all almost 35 years ago. Metroid for the NES. And spoilers, I guess, for what little there is to spoil. I just know somebody's gonna complain if I don't warn them first. The Metroid series is unique among Nintendo's lineup. While the company is usually known for their games full of bright colors, inviting locations, and characters of whimsical fun, Metroid was the weird kid in the room when it hit store shelves in 1986. It took elements from Mario and Zelda, those being the plump red plumbers platforming mixed with Link's knack for exploration and growing arsenal of items, but also added in elements from a popular film series that debuted the decade prior. Yeah, the team took inspiration for their game from Ridley Scott's Alien of all things, which I believe that the director of the film is also the inspiration behind naming the main character's rival Ridley as an homage. From this idea, the team got to work on creating an unsettling environment for players to explore, with dangerous creatures hiding around every corner and bringing the dread of space to the Nintendo Entertainment System. I mean, let's just compare the intros. You've got Mario and Zelda with these really fun or exciting title screens, something to pump you up for a good time. But right off the bat, popping Metroid into your system and hitting the power button left you greeted with a different tone altogether. This title screen was meant to spook you. It's an indicator that the adventure you're about to embark on is one of isolation and peril, and I love how different it is from the rest of Nintendo's library. Not that this is a straight-up horror game, though I do think that the Metroid series is the closest Nintendo ever got to developing within that genre. While there is a rather threatening overtone to the overall experience, there's still a sense of grandeur added to the series. The story of the original game begins with the worlds of the galaxy uniting together under a galactic federation, but tensions begin to rise as space pirates have been causing trouble across the cosmos, and the most recent problem they've gotten into is the acquisition of an incredibly dangerous species known as Metroids. These creatures can latch onto their victims and suck the very life force out of them, and to make matters worse, they can multiply rapidly when exposed to beta rays and are virtually indestructible. The Metroids were discovered by the Galactic Federation on planet SR-388, but it looks like the creatures managed to wipe out the entire population of the planet, meaning the space pirates could potentially use them as a devastating biological weapon. The Federation tries to attack their base on planet Zebes, but but were unsuccessful. With few options left, they turned to a solitary bounty hunter known as Samus Aran to send to Zebes, infiltrate their base, kill their generals, and destroy their leader, an artificial intelligence known as Mother Brain. And as Samus Aran is one of the few beings in the known universe capable of destroying the Metroids, the hunter is instructed to annihilate any of the creatures found on the planet to keep them from spreading across the galaxy and causing unknown levels of destruction. Not a lot of the story was actually explained in the game itself. The most you get is this little blurb of text on the title screen that issues Samus's orders and gives you some vague idea of what the events of this game are. Everything else is found in this adorable little booklet. Certain details would be expanded on later in the series, the history of this universe, the origins of the Metroids, and even Samus Aran, but as this was the beginning of the bounty hunter's adventures, everything here was left somewhat ambiguous and unspecific. There's even a couple of key phrases and words in the manual chosen to deceive the player, but more on that later, yeah? So once you make it to Zebes, how are you expected to fight an army of space pirates or a legion of life-absorbing alien creatures? Well, it was the 1980s, so it really couldn't be too complicated. Metroid is a side-scrolling action-adventure game. For the most part, you're gonna be running around through the corridors of Zebes, shooting aliens and enhancing your arsenal to progress deeper into the depths of the planet. You'll be spending a lot of time blasting through indigenous wildlife, but a little roadblock that you run into early on is that your arm cannon has some really terrible range, and you have to find an upgrade for this thing before it can even shoot across the entire screen. And that is the other thing you're gonna be doing a lot of in this game, finding upgrades. During your exploration, you'll be running across several obstacles that require a new weapon or power-up to advance. In fact, the game wastes no time teaching you that you'll need to break out of the classic side-scrolling movement people were used to by having you turn to the left of the screen and collect your first upgrade, the Morph Ball. The sprite used for Samus isn't able to crouch down into a crawl, so the workaround was that this weird little item here lets you transform into a ball and roll around through tight spaces and such. You'll also have to collect health upgrades through these energy canisters, new beam weapons for your arm cannon, which is one of the coolest video game weapons of all time. Just saying. As well as boots that will allow you to jump higher and reach new areas to collect goodies. One of the most helpful items in the game is known as the Screw Attack, which lets you tear through enemies in a powered somersault. It can take out just about anything, and you can clear through enemies super quickly with it. Also, insert reference to Some Call Me Johnny here. The main thing you'll be picking up in this game though are missiles, cause there's a lot of them scattered all over the place and you'll want to pick up a good amount. For one thing, most upgrades are going to be locked behind these colored doors that you'll need to shoot missiles with to open. They're also pretty helpful when it comes to taking out bosses. Not that there's many of them. Before getting to Mother Brain, you'll need to lay waste to her two generals, Kraid and Ridley. Kraid is kind of interesting, if only because the dude has a doppelganger hanging out a few rooms away from him. This imposter is pretty easy to take out, but why is he here? I guess this was just meant to be a fake out or something? If you go into this fight prepared, you won't have a lot of trouble. It usually helps to have the ice beam so you can freeze his needles in air and then launch missiles at his face to bury him with medical bills until you've beaten him. Also, don't forget this little energy tank that's hiding down here. As for Ridley, well, he's this awesome space pterodactyl dragon thing that's gone on to be the main rival for Samus and a pretty terrifying foe at that, but that's definitely not how I would describe him in this game. I beat him by basically standing right in front of his face and just spamming the missile button until he stopped moving. I'd actually recommend going for him before tackling Kraid, if only because beating either boss will grant you a pretty hefty missile upgrade and Kraid can just take a lot more punishment. That and the road getting to Ridley is longer, so you'll have more time to build up your arsenal along the way. As far as exploring the dangerous caverns of planet Zebes though, there's one thing you're going to want to keep handy at all times, and that is one of these. I really hope there aren't any purists yelling at me right now, but look. Metroid was developed during a very different time in the game industry. New games weren't coming out every week like they do now, so they needed to be designed to keep the player entertained for a pretty substantial amount of time. That usually resulted in padding and lots of it. You can tell the team was struggling to build enough assets to create a full living world for the player to explore because the copy and pasting is off the charts here. I swear I've walked into this room like 5 times in the last 10 minutes. What also doesn't help is that at the time, this game really wasn't designed with a method to organically convey to the player where they should be going next, so everything is super open and obtuse, and there's some areas you really would have absolutely no idea to pass through if someone didn't tell you or you didn't fall into it by accident. At times, this game isn't even just cryptic, it's downright stupid. I can't even imagine how long it must have taken some kids to find all this stuff back in the day with no help. I'm sure some of them brought out the graph paper and some pens to make a layout for themselves, but these days, just print out a map. It makes the whole adventure a lot more comfortable, and it'll help you find your way to progress. I know that a huge part of the Metroid franchise is exploring the unknown and discovering items and passageways for yourself, but in this game, you're really not going to be exploring as much as just stumbling around until you accidentally go the right way. Even then, because so many of these areas look exactly the same, you'll probably have a tough time figuring out where you are, and that's even if you are using a map. Once you find your way around this labyrinth and kill off the 2 big bosses, you have to backtrack towards the beginning of the game to make it to Torian, where Mother Brain is waiting. It can be a long trek back, so I usually just get myself killed so I get respawned at the beginning of the area. It's a lot faster, but it does respawn you with just a sliver of health, so I always leave this one energy tank at the beginning of Brinstar for last so I can get a quick refill before heading to the final area. Once you open the passage that was blocked by these statues of Ridley and Kraid, you can now enter Torian, and the namesake of the game finally shows its face. Metroids are not something you really want to toy around with, because these suckers are fast, and if they latch onto you, the only way to escape is by dropping into your morph ball form and planting some morph ball bombs to get them off. Then you have to act really fast to take them out before they latch onto you again and drain your life in a matter of seconds. The only thing Metroids are weak to is extreme cold temperatures, so you have to freeze them in place with your ice beam and then lay them full of missiles. To gripe about that for just a moment though, there is a powerful arm cannon upgrade called the Wave Beam you can collect before coming here, but it's not going to do anything to Metroids. There's more than one place to pick up the ice beam, but it's not going to do you any good if you didn't already know you need to swap back to that weapon before coming into the final area. This is something the other games in the series would address, but here it is pretty clunky design. After risking your life through hallways full of Metroids, you finally make it to Mother Brain herself. She can't fight back, but that's okay because she's got tons of defenses set up around her, like these barriers that take a ton of missiles to destroy, guns coming out of the walls, these spaghetti-o looking things called Rinkas, and a lot of frame rate lag. She's still not that tough to take out if you're careful though, and once she's down for the count, a self-destruct sequence initiates and you've got to sprint your way out of the facility before it all explodes. I actually kind of love this last minute escape sequence, and I'm not the only one because this did kind of go on to become a staple of the series. It helps carry over the energy from the battle and probably even caught a few people off guard back in the day. There's nothing difficult about this, but I think it's a fun way to cap off the adventure. But this is where things get interesting, because the ending that awaits you once you get off this elevator actually varies depending on how long it took you to beat the game. If you manage to finish your quest somewhere between 3 to 5 hours, you get a little surprise. Samus is congratulated on a job well done, and as the helmet of our hero's power armor disappears, we see that Samus Aran is in fact a woman. This is one of those legendary twists that people in the community still talk about today. You just didn't see women take the lead in games back in those days, especially in a game that was filled with stuff like this, all this action and peril, creepy aliens and dark isolated caverns, but this was the game that did it. I tried really hard to keep the reveal about Samus a secret throughout this whole review because I know my parents watch my channel, and they have no idea who Samus Aran is, let alone that she was a woman, so I thought they would think it was a nice surprise. Pretty sure that everybody else watching this review already knew that though. If you manage to beat the game in an even shorter amount of time though, you still get different endings. Beat the game in under 3 hours and you'll see Samus without her armor and in this Bailey suit. But if you beat it in under 1 hour, she's in a bikini. Yeah, it was the 80s. I'd honestly say that the ending of this game is the strongest thing about it, because honestly, just about everything else here really hasn't aged well. Visually, I think it's fine for the time, but it still suffers from the repetitive environments. The audio department fares a little bit better. I mean, a lot of these little jingles and tunes that play when you pick up items have gone on to be reused for the entire rest of the series. And many of the tunes in this game really help set a mood for the location you're in. One of my favorite touches is just how unnerving the music can be when you're entering an upgrade room. Spooky. That being said, as good as some of these bass compositions are, they can get grating to listen to after a while, and the poor NES sound chip isn't helping much. Those high pitches can get really tough to listen to. Beyond that, the obtuse and confusing layout was definitely a product of its time, and compounding on that issue is the fact that you can't even save traditionally in this game. Well, unless you have the Famicom version from Japan for some reason. No, instead you have to use this good old password system, and I've had something to say about how I feel about those in the past. It did lead the way to some really cool tricks with passwords, like the Justin Bailey code. Nobody knows for sure why it's called this, but it lets you play the game as Samus outside of her power suit, and her hair is green. Probably color palette limitations on the older hardware, I don't know. It still looks cool. There's also another code that can crash your game, and I'm not gonna show the whole thing here, cause again, my mother is watching this. But no, really, jokes aside, I don't know what the story is behind the Engage Ridley code, but please don't use it. You might break your cartridge, or at worst, your system. I've even heard of it breaking 3DS systems for people who try to use it on the Virtual Console. Nintendo must just not like that kind of language.
Watch your profanity.
Right, I'm sorry.
I really can't say that I recommend this game to the average player. I have a soft spot for it, and I definitely think it's charming in a weird sort of way, but unless you grew up with this game, there's not much reason to go back now, unless you just really want to know how this series got on its feet. There was a remake for the game that was released on the Game Boy Advance that helped iron out most, if not all, of its problems, but we're not going to be able to look at that this year. We will get to it just in another Metroid month. For now, let's keep moving forward, so I hope you'll join me next week as we take a look at the next outing in Samus Aran's adventures with Metroid 2: Return of Samus for the Game Boy. Until then, you can find me on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, whichever you prefer, links in the description, and of course, as always, spread the word, tell your friends, and until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching. See you next mission. Hello. Not getting used to that. Anyway, welcome back to Metroid Month. So games like Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda went on to become very successful franchises, seeing countless sequels and other support after their debut on the NES back in the 80s. But sadly, that wasn't quite the same case for Metroid. The game was fairly well received review-wise upon its release, but it was no blockbuster title. The game still didn't sell super well, especially in Japan, and the game stood alone as the only title in the series for a little while there. Although, and I was kind of surprised to find this out while researching for these reviews, but there was one piece of media that was released the same year as the original game. Okay, let's give this a shot. Consider this my audition tape. Did you know? There was a novelization of the original Metroid title called Metroid Zebes Invasion Order. It was released in the later part of the year that the game was published by Futoshaba and was released only in Japan and never saw any form of official English translation. It was a game book, similar to a choose-your-own-adventure novel, and the illustrations contained very different depictions of the Metroids, Samus Aran's power armor, and depicted the space pirates as humans rather than the aliens and bestian forms the franchise would later establish. This was also the first time Samus's face was shown in detail. Alright, done with that bit. Yeah, this book definitely isn't canon at this point, but if you were a fan back in those days, and I guess if you lived in Japan, this was kind of all you had to go off of if you wanted to know more about this universe. That being said, there were a few things that happened in this book that bear a remarkable resemblance to events that would take place in later games. So was all of this intentional, or was it all just pure coincidence? Well, nobody really knows for sure. It's just kind of one of those mysteries of the franchise. One element that wouldn't take long to show up in games proper, though, was this image of a heavily mutated Metroid, and man, I just love the way this thing looks. I actually kind of love all of the visual design behind this book and wouldn't mind seeing this kind of style make it into the games more often. But the mutated Metroid was a harrowing evolution of an already terrifying species of creatures, and 5 years later, after the original game's release, the franchise would play around with that idea a lot more. Yeah, 5 years. It took half a decade before there was another game in this series, but in 1991, a sequel was finally released in the form of Metroid 2: Return of Samus for the original Game Boy. Some spoilers ahead, but let's go ahead and jump on into this. The setup to this game is actually pretty simple. The Galactic Federation decided that the Metroids are
Too dangerous to be left alive.
and sent a research crew to planet SR-388 to see if any were left. Yeah, there were definitely some Metroids still hanging around there. So naturally, after not hearing back from the research team, or even the search and rescue party the Federation sent to check up on them, they decided to give Samus a call.
Hey, Samus, so you know those Metroid things? You're good at killing those. Can you, go to their home planet and kill all of them? Like, all of them? Nothing pays the bills like a good old genocide. Okay, thanks, bye!
So Samus starts her mission on SR-388 to eradicate a species, and I guess also find the research team, but that never really comes up in the game itself. This game plays a lot like the first one, but the first thing you'll notice is, well, it's that. The screen is a lot smaller, but everything is zoomed in by quite a bit. Samus is more detailed than before, but exploring had to be designed a bit differently, just on the principle that you really can't see as much of what's around you. There are concessions made for this. Overall, the areas are much more open, so while this could have easily hindered the presentation of the game much more, the way the world of SR-388 is designed serves as the best case scenario for this kind of setup. You still gotta be on your toes though. Enemies can catch you off guard a little easier than before since you have less time to notice them before they're on top of you, but this beginning area here does does a pretty good job of getting you acquainted with the general pace of things before you run into your first Metroid, but before you can move into attack, the creature transforms in front of you and springs into attack mode. This little guy isn't too hard to take out, just launch like 5 missiles into his face and he's out of here, but it's still a rather alarming moment, and it highlights a very dangerous element of Samus's hunt for these creatures. You're on the home turf of the Metroids now, and as you see them thrive in their natural habitat, they're prone to metamorphosizing into different forms that get deadlier with every iteration. The first game had already done a pretty good job of establishing why these aliens were a threat, but now we know that those were just the larval stages of this animal. As you continue your adventure, you'll encounter Alpha Metroids like this little guy, Gamma Metroids that pack a bigger punch but still aren't too unreasonable to take out, Zeta Metroids that really make the influence of H.R. Geiger much more apparent and can take quite a bit of punishment, and these terrifying things. The Omega Metroids love to get really up close to you, launch fireballs at you, and man, it deals a lot of damage. Your best bet is to try to get around it and launch a missile into its back, since it deals about triple the amount of usual damage. Surviving your encounters with these guys is one thing, but first you gotta track them down. It's a lot like the first game, where you explore a series of caves and old ruins trying to hunt your prey. You'll always have this little indicator on the bottom right of the screen showing you just how many Metroids are left to destroy, and if you pause the game, you'll see how many are in the immediate area. Another nice little touch is that you can always tell when one of these little suckers is nearby by spotting the shell of their larval form hanging out on the ground, meaning you're close to another encounter. Now, while hunting Metroids is obviously the main goal, there's still plenty of reason to explore around you and collect energy tanks to enhance your life meter, stock up on missiles to increase your capacity, find new and more powerful beam weapons for your arm cannon, and new upgrades to help traversing a bit easier. The biggest standouts are the Spider Ball and Spring Ball, which help give your Morph Ball form a little more utility by letting you jump around and even cling to surfaces to reach new places. Then there's the Space Jump, which combined with your Screw Attack can make you a flying death machine, when it decides to work. There's a sort of rhythm to be found when inputting jumps to make this ability work, and I can pull it off pretty well for the most part, but there are times when it feels like it just kind of decides not to read by button presses, and I find myself falling a really long way down, and that can get really irritating. That's not my only issue with traversal though. One of the more disappointing aspects of this game is that the presentation being so up close and claustrophobic makes traveling in this game just as tedious as it was in the first, but it's also far more linear. You don't progress through the system of this planet by finding upgrades and moving forward because of the new skills at your disposal, but instead you're just kind of blocked off from moving on to the next area from this lava or acid or whatever that just magically flows downward to grant you passage whenever you kill all of the Metroids in the area that the game wants you to be in. It really feels like it takes the agency away from you, like you don't get to use Samus's abilities until the game tells you can. We'll get to it. And it's not like the presentation is all bad. Actually, I think there's plenty to commend for the time period. This game was originally meant to be played on the OG Game Boy, which didn't have much in the way of color output. Sure, future versions of the handheld would give you something nicer to look at, but in its original form, stuff had to be readable without the benefit of color display, so we get effects like the Varia suit giving us our first look at Samus's huge shoulder pads, which would go on to be kind of a staple of her design, or this effect where activating missiles shows her arm cannon opening up at the front. And I mean, I even like the designs for the evolving Metroids, but even then, you do get a taste of how the limitations of the hardware were holding this concept back. Like, this guy has legs now, but he's still floating around like a ghost. It's just silly. There was some genuine care put into the visuals here. There really was, but unfortunately, no matter how much you try to add some graphical flair to a game, it's really only going to take you so far if the gameplay itself is flawed right at the very foundation. The game still falls short of letting many of its locations be very memorable. I commend the effort for making a lot of the Metroid rooms look distinct, or adding details like new ways to enter or exit upgrade rooms for a bit of variety, but there's still a lot of copy and pasting going on here, and while I wouldn't say that using a map is quite as necessary as it was for the first game, it'll still help and I do still recommend it. The biggest reason is because with a small field of view and often samey looking environments, even knowing where certain things are won't help much because you'll have such a hard time remembering what location you're in that you'll just get lost anyway. And while there isn't a lot of backtracking in this game for item pickups and things of that nature, you still need to remember where these recharge stations are that will refill your health and missiles because the creatures on this planet can deal plenty of damage and the Metroids especially eat up a lot of missiles. And the item drops from defeated enemies are honestly kind of pathetic. The other thing you'll want to remember the location of are save stations. The password system is nowhere to be seen here, which is fine by me. Instead, you've got these save stations, but it does come with a bit of a trade-off. In the first game, death meant restarting at the beginning of the area you're in with a small amount of health, but you kept everything that you collected up to that point. In Metroid 2, on the other hand, this is your checkpoint. If you die at any point in the game, you go right back to where you last saved. This is how the series would handle saving progress going forward, but here it can really bite, especially since in the later portion of the game, the pacing of the action gets a lot faster, but the save and refill stations are really tough to come by. In fact, in one of the final areas filled with nothing but Zeta Metroids, which are probably the most difficult enemies to fight, there is a save station, sure, but no health or refill stations to be found. So unless you're really good at not taking damage and land every single missile you fire, or you just love farming enemies for tiny droplets of health or missile pickups, you gotta trek back to the last place these refill stations are, and it's a few areas back. That sucks. I guess to be fair though, it does have a sort of roundabout benefit. Yeah, it was hard, but it really helps add to the tension of fighting the more advanced versions of the Metroids. It's especially effective in this one area where you see 2 shells, but only a tiny little Alpha Metroid, which should pose 0 threat to you at this point. But after trying to move forward and seeing that you can't keep going yet, you double back and suddenly you've got a Zeta Metroid coming after you, like all of you lovely viewers coming to hit that subscribe button. Come on, I know you want to do it. Just because I like it doesn't mean it's good, but I also can't help but think that the game is only 3 hours long anyway, so backtracking here isn't the end of the world, and if it helps enhance the intimidation factor of these creatures, that's gotta be worth something. Yeah, but nothing quite compares to what happens after you make it past this area, because just like with the original title, the ending of this game is kind of the best part. You've collected everything in the ruins of this planet, braved the dark tunnels within its caverns, and destroyed various evolutions of Metroids along the way. Now, only one remains, but as you make your way to the ultimate goal, suddenly the number jumps. These are young ones too, as a group of Metroid larvae attack you in the final corridors until you finally reach the ultimate creature, the Queen Metroid. While not a terribly difficult boss fight, she is pretty cool. Best strategy is to wait for her to open her mouth, pop her face with a missile, and hop into her mouth in ball form so you can travel down into her stomach and let the bombs do the rest. Okay, you know what? Saying it out loud, that's a little gruesome, don't you think? I love the build up to this fight, and even if the boss isn't really all that hard to take out, everything surrounding her helps elevate it a bit. But once you're done with the battle, your mission is complete. Or is it? Upon leaving the Queen's lair, you see a soul egg, which hatches into the last Metroid of its species, a baby. We'll get to it. Instead of attacking Samus, the infant lets out a soft cry, flying around Samus and not leaving her side. The creature is obviously imprinted on our bounty hunter and thinks Samus is its mother. I think this is the moment that keeps me thinking fondly of this game, despite all of its problems. We just went on a mission to murder an entire species. I mean, yeah, they pose a threat, but only because people keep taking them out of their environment and trying to use them as weapons. Here on their home planet, they live among other animals and are part of a living ecosystem, and it would be foolish to think that there wouldn't be consequences to removing them from that equation. More on that in a couple of weeks. I don't think this was a mission Samus was thrilled about. There were even times when I was feeling bad about what we were doing, but this little moment here with Samus taking in this innocent creature helps lend a bit of sweetness to what's otherwise a pretty grim tale. There's no crazy action set piece to end this game on, just a quiet walk back to your gunship with your new companion. Make it back to the ship with the baby, and the credits roll with, of course, alternate endings depending on your completion time. In a lot of ways, this game struggles to overcome a ton of technical limitations to do something rather impressive for the system it was released on. There's a tone being set here throughout the adventure, but yeah, it's held back by the hardware. There's a couple of tracks in this game I like, especially the credit and main overworld theme, but most of the others show an awkward attempt to create an ambience on a Game Boy sound chip with mixed results. Mix all of that with some flawed structure and cool but ultimately hindered presentation, and I end up feeling very mixed on this game. But there are qualities here that I have to appreciate and recognize, even some that the future remakes of this game failed to capture, but I'll have to go further into detail on that in a later Metroid Month. So that's 2 games in a row now where I seem to enjoy it on at least some level, but because of their archaic design, I can't really recommend it to the general gaming community. At this point, you might be wondering why I even bothered to put together a Metroid Month if my opinions on these games seem to be so middling, but if you tune in next week, it'll all start to come clear as we take a look at Super Metroid for the SNES. Until then, you can find me on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, whichever you prefer, links in the description, and of course, as always, spread the word, tell your friends, and until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching. See you next mission.
Hey, Samus, it's me again. We are actually calling to talk to you about your car's extended warranty. If you could give me a call back at 6666666. I'd really appreciate it.
Hello. we expecting a different kind of entrance? So, this is gonna be a weird review to make. I've looked at good games, I've looked at bad games, and I've looked at Hide Live, but this is the first time I've sat down to look at something that's recognized as a classic, an undisputed pillar of the industry, something that's often regarded as one of the greatest games of all time. And the hardest part about this is that so many other great creators have already shared their thoughts on this game. I'm gonna do my best to bring something new to the table, add my own spin to it, all that good stuff, but if I can make a quick detour for just a few minutes, I think we should address something that was actually introduced after today's subject matter. In the early days of Metroid, the franchise always took a somewhat minimalistic approach when it comes to storytelling, but that's not to say the series was ever devoid of plot. It was there, and the plot elements helped elevate the gameplay moments, but they were also used in a sort of action movie style where it was just enough to keep a motivating force for the player's actions. The gameplay and plot complemented each other, which is the ideal scenario when creating a game like this, but there was definitely a desire from a lot of the fans to know more about this universe, and especially the leading lady herself. Well, they really weren't gonna see a whole lot of that until around 18 years after the series started, when a manga was released that delved deeper into certain elements of the Metroid world and helped offer a clearer context for the events that served as a foundation for the games. This manga as a whole is no longer considered canon in its entirety, and we're not going to tackle all of it. I mean, not even much of it at all for this video, but there are a couple of important ideas that were introduced here that will help get a better understanding of later events in the series and the significance they hold. The biggest concept this manga brought to the table was the origins of Samus Aran. We see that when she was just a child, the colony she was raised on was attacked by space pirates, and the big, grape-flavored pterodactyl Ridley was leading the charge. Not only did he and his forces lay waste to her home, but he even went as far as to murder Samus's parents right in front of her face, which is, you know, not an easy thing for a kid to deal with. From there, we learn that she was taken in by the ancient and wise race of bird people aliens known as the Chozo and continued her childhood on planet Zebes. Yeah, the same planet from the first game where we fought Mother Brain and the Metroids was where our hero grew up, where she was infused with Chozo DNA to help her survive the harsh environments of her new home, and her avian alien foster parents were the ones who gave her the iconic power suit, which explains why the statues made in their likeness hold the upgrades and abilities she acquires during her missions in places the Chozo once resided. Later in her life, Samus left Zebes to join the Galactic Federation as a soldier, but when the Chozo's artificial intelligence known as Mother Brain amassed an army and took over the planet, eradicating the Chozo in her wake, our now half-human protag left the military to serve the galaxy as a solitary bounty hunter, becoming the warrior we know her as today. Yeah, sorry if you weren't expecting a little history lesson there, but I brought it up for a couple of reasons. This information isn't just helpful for understanding the material we'll be discussing in the rest of Metroid Month, but it also helps retroactively make the events of Super Metroid more significant. But I honestly think that these changes that were made later on work for the best because Super Metroid really doesn't spend a whole lot of time telling a traditional story. All of that said, spoilers ahead, let's go ahead and jump on into Super Metroid.
The last Metroid is in captivity. The galaxy is at peace.
The game begins with one of my favorite musical pieces in the series. Samus recounts the events of the first two games to catch up any uninitiated players, defeating Mother Brain, doing a lot of Metroid murder, and adopting a brain-eating amoeba, but all the while, this great song is playing to amp you up for the adventure that comes next. This piece is something the series has been using for decades after this game's release to give you that feeling of kicking off a dark but heroic adventure, and it's one of my favorite tracks in the industry. So after Samus took the baby Metroid from SR-388, she delivered it to some trusted scientists in the Galactic Federation. Yeah, I remember when I thought the Galactic Federation was trustworthy. The scientists found some really amazing stuff, seemingly discovering properties of the species that could actually be used for the betterment of mankind rather than a danger to it, but as soon as Samus left the station to find some more work, the same facility let out a distress signal. Investigating the issue, Samus lands back on Sarah Station to find... yeah, you know what? I'm sure they're fine. Locating the baby Metroid, she discovers that the attacker was none other than Ridley himself, who gives Samus a good ol' smackin' and takes off, leaving the station to explode. Our hero narrowly escapes the exploding facility and tracks the pirate back to planet Zebes, where it all began. A detail I really like here is that when you arrive on Zebes, the rest of the story is told without words, letting the events and actions speak for themselves, but also telling a story through the game's environment. I mean, one of the first places you visit on this trip is Old Torian, where you'd beat Mother Brain in the first game. You see this place is broken and destroyed, just how you left it. All the same, there's an eeriness here, like a haunting presence from your past. You travel down into Crateria and see a really cool recreation of where you began your adventure in the original title and obtain the Morph Ball right where it was the first time, but now collecting it activates a camera. You're being watched. Making your way back up, you see space pirates swarming the place, and all of this happening is enough to make something very clear. Mother Brain somehow survived and is now rebuilding her army from somewhere deep within this planet you once called home. From here, it's pretty simple. Find the infant Metroid and destroy the evil forces that get in your way. That is your mission. Things might start looking kind of familiar. Super Metroid takes a template of its predecessors, that being the idea of exploring the various passageways and corridors of a deadly alien world, but takes the time to expand it and make it work far better than it did before. I think the first big strength of this game is how the exploration and upgrading aspects work hand in hand. By exploring, you find something that blocks your progress, but you will also discover new abilities and items that will help you overcome obstacles and move forward. What's better is that when you find these items, the game will follow up by letting you test it, which will open the path to older areas you couldn't access before, but you can access now, which in turn will lead you to more abilities to get through even more obstacles. Of course, it helps that getting between all of these points is a joy in and of itself, because this is the best control Samus has had up to this point and possibly even up till now, depending on who you ask. She's faster, more nimble, and even without power-ups, getting from point A to point B has never felt this good. Then of course, with the power-ups, it does get even better. The standard stuff returns here: the morph ball, spring ball, high jump boots, space jump, and of course the screw attack, and you can also get upgrades to your armor like the Varia suit and gravity suit, but now instead of just granting you a defense boost like in the past titles, these suits have practical applications as well, like how the Varia suit protects you from heat damage so you can traverse through hot areas, or how the gravity suit allows you to move around freely underwater, whereas without it, the water would slow down your movements and keep you from jumping as high. The upgrades to your arm cannon are also way more useful now, as the elements of these new beams actually stack rather than requiring you to run around and recollect the same beam weapons. Good. Make the player earn these upgrades, but keep the benefits and trim the fat. That's how good game design works. And then there's all new abilities, like the grapple beam that lets you swing around on overhead structures, kind of like another character that I really like. Can't imagine who. You also get access to the power bombs, an upgrade from your morph ball bombs that can wipe out enemies super easily and will often show off the entrances to hidden areas, and honestly, I like this more than the other item you get for that kind of job, that being the X-ray scope. More on that in a minute. My personal favorite upgrade is the speed booster. Once you get it, you can run around for a bit before sprinting into this boosted mode where you can blast through certain obstacles in the terrain or even enemies, but you can also build up this speed and store the power of the kinetic force, unleashing it into a powerful jump that will send you rocketing off until you hit a wall, letting you reach insane distances and find new areas. This is a technique called the Shine Spark, and it's one of the most useful abilities in the game, and it's actually taught to you by one of the wild animals you find on Zebes. In fact, there's another little group of friendly animals that teach Samus the wall jump, another great technique where you can jump towards a surface and propel yourself off it to keep yourself moving up to help you climb up certain locations, but it doesn't stop there. Because of the free movement Samus has when she's in the air in this game, you're actually capable of moving yourself back to a wall after jumping and using the wall jump to continually leap upward. If you practice at this and really learn how the movement works, you can use a single wall or even small areas to make it to locations that should be out of reach. That introduces one of the best aspects of the game. While the layout of Planet Zebes offers a constant feedback of discovery and increasing your strength and establishes a really comfortable route for finding all of those abilities and making it to Mother Brain and the baby Metroid, the freestyle of movement for this game means that you don't have to take that route to make your goal. Sequence breaking. It's a beautiful thing. Want to make it to this area without having to grab the high jump boots first? Use a wall jump on this ledge to make it up there and save yourself a few minutes. Want to make it over to this energy tank before you get the grapple beam? A well-placed Shine Spark will do the trick. And that's not even acknowledging the weird exploits fans take advantage of, like the Mock Ball. Honestly, the examples here are endless, and I think it really helps highlight the community-driven aspect of the game. Sure, I mean, you can try to find where every last item and goodie is in the game, so you can show off now that the game shows you what your completion rate for collecting was at the end of the credits, but if you don't know what you're doing, you might end up with a screen like this, and there is nothing more aggravating, trust me. But communicating with other fans, visiting forums, or watching Let's Plays can give you insight on the tips and tricks on not only how to find all the items in the game to help you face the dangers of the planet, but also how to trim your completion time too. And oh boy, has the speedrunning community had a field day with this over the years. Seriously, go watch a speedrun for this game and see the absolute digital wizardry these maniacs perform to knock a few seconds off their completion time. It is insane. This kind of intense collector's perfectionism certainly isn't required, but it can go a long way. Still, you're better equipped than ever before to find helpful little items in your journey, mostly because of the gracious addition of an actual map for this game, and oh man, I love this thing. I am so glad this was introduced to the series. I would still recommend some outside help if you're going for that 100% screen at the end though, because there are still some hilariously obtuse ways of hiding items in this game, and yeah, the X-ray scope is supposed to help with this, but honestly, I really don't like this thing. In order to even use it, you have to stop dead in your tracks to look around and and see if you can find a hidden gubbin. It's very slow, and honestly having to stop to even use it like this basically makes the thing useless to me. Whatever way you decide to expand your arsenal though, you'll want to pack plenty of firepower and be on your toes at all times, because this game is packing a lot of boss fights. Like a really jacked up match against Kraid alongside another little fake version of him, kind of like in the original game, a cheeky reference I can appreciate. But as fearsome as some of these creatures are, nothing quite matches the honestly pretty dark way you can take some of these guys out, like the fish monster Dragon. The ideal way to fight her is by aiming for her stomach and slamming missiles into it, but my preferred method is cracking open these electrical ports, letting her grab me, and then aiming my grapple beam just right so I can latch onto that circuit and use myself as a weapon to fry her in a matter of seconds. The one that still surprises me the most is this guy Crocomire. You gotta hit him in the face with your arm cannon whenever he opens his mouth to force him to shuffle backwards until he falls into a pit of lava and... Yeah, okay Nintendo. But I guess having blood in Mortal Kombat was just taking it too far. Honestly, the grim atmosphere looms over this entire game, even starting with just that title screen, and the music is a huge part of that. This is still my favorite soundtrack in the series, with songs that perfectly paint what a creepy and desolate place Zebes has become, but the visuals do a great job of this as well. Like this creepy, haunted ship that I still don't know the origins of, or how defeating Dragon causes her young to surround her in, well, honestly, I can't help but wonder if they're feeding off her remains. Super Metroid is honestly pretty creepy. Like, the sense of danger here is so real because the developers did such a great job of making this place feel incredibly unsettling, and like anything on this planet, with the exception of these little guys, won't hesitate to kill you. Of course, the most dangerous thing here is actually the creature you're trying to save. Once you make it to Ridley, you have a fun little rematch with him in a fight that I think really helps sell why this guy keeps coming back as Samus's main rival. I mean, look at him, he's just so cool. Also, don't waste missiles on this guy. Just charge up your arm cannon and use your beam. It actually takes him out way faster. Once he's down, you can go into the next room and save the baby. Oh, well, that's not great. With the generals of Mother Brain's armies destroyed, you can return to the beginning area of the game to watch the statue really slowly get out of your way and open the path to New Torian, where you see Metroids? Yeah, it looks like the space pirates were experimenting on the infant they stole. I mean, earlier on in the game, you see these kind of failed experiments trying to replicate the creature called Mocktroids, but they're piss easy to kill and nowhere near as deadly as the real thing. But it looks like they figured out how to get the last of its kind to propagate, and once you take out a few, man, I just gotta note how much I love this room. The atmosphere here is great. You see a bunch of creatures just kind of frozen in time, but as soon as you touch them, they disintegrate to dust. It's kind of like the life was drained out of them. Sucked dry by some kind of... Wait a minute. The massive Metroid swoops in to kill you, but before finishing the job, it stops. This is the baby. That's what you came to save. It recognizes Samus, and almost like it's in shame of nearly killing her, it flees. The space pirates were probably blasting this thing full of beta rays to get more out of it, and that caused it to grow in size, but with the poor thing now in hiding, there's only one thing left to go after. But after locating Mother Brain and blasting through a really easy fight that should look pretty familiar, she pulls a fast one on you and transforms into this massive hulking beast. You don't even stand a chance against this chicken-legged freak as she starts blasting a weapon called the Hyper Beam at Samus, and just as she's about to end this bounty hunter's life, the baby swoops in to the rescue, attacks Mother Brain, and grants Samus the energy it drained before the space pirate leader gets herself back up and kills the infant right above our hero's head. With the Hyper Beam granted by the baby, Samus annihilates Mother Brain and... oh. Okay, right, yeah, probably should have seen that coming. Cue the insane sprint out of the facility, destroy a few space pirates along the way, and please don't forget to save your little green friends on your way out, and jump back into your gunship, safely flying away as the entire planet explodes. Don't worry, those little green animals you saved made it out too. Somehow. Can they fly ship? They have to be able to fly ship. Watch the credits listing the names of this incredible team, beat the game in under 3 hours to get a personal send-off from Samus, and see where my little outro catchphrase came from. Everything here is so tightly knit, with the story adding some thrills and twists, but never drowning out the action and suspense of the moment-to-moment occurrences that make this adventure memorable. The tight controls, open-ended and rewarding level design, incredible music, exciting set pieces, and man, Man, what a good game. I love Super Metroid so much, and I'm glad it's so easily accessible these days. A physical copy will still net you a pretty penny, but Nintendo has always made this game available digitally one way or another. I still wouldn't recommend this as your first Metroid game. You're probably better off starting with like Zero Mission or something, which I'll be talking about another time, but the legacy that Super Metroid holds speaks for itself. I had a really hard time writing this script. I had to leave out a lot of stuff just for the sake of not making this video twice the length and actually finishing Metroid Month, but I hope I was able to convey, at least in part, why this game is so beloved. Many would say that this was the peak of the franchise, but I still think that there's plenty of other games to really appreciate out of this series, like the game we'll be talking about next week, so I hope you'll join me then as we take a look at Metroid Fusion for the Game Boy Advance. Until then, you can find me on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, whichever you prefer, links in the description, and of course, as always, spread the word, tell your friends, and until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching. See you next mission. Super Metroid was a trailblazer in every sense of the word. The atmosphere, gameplay structure, and even the minimalistic story really meant a lot to people, even to the point of helping create the term Metroidvania to describe a subgenre of games that took after the groundwork that Metroid and Castlevania laid out. But despite all of that, the Metroid series would still remain dormant for nearly a decade before seeing another release. Well, why was that? I mean, didn't it sell well? Wasn't it pretty well received? Yeah. In America. The Metroid series has never been a heavy hitter in Japan, which probably makes sense on some level considering a lot of the ideas behind these games were inspired by Western media. It had its fans over there, but it wasn't enough to keep a bunch of Metroid titles pumping out onto new machines like you would see for the more popular Nintendo mascots. I mean, just look at the Nintendo 64. There were lots of Mario games, from Mario 64 to tons of spin-offs like Paper Mario and the Mario Party series, and the Zelda franchise dropped one of the most critically praised games of all time and followed it up with my favorite game ever made, and you'd better believe I'm waiting for the perfect opportunity to gush over Majora's Mask. But Metroid? Nothing. The only time Samus appeared on that console was for Super Smash Bros. It wasn't until 8 years after Super Metroid release that fans would hear from their favorite blonde bounty hunter again, but she was coming back with a plan to make up for the lost time because in November of 2002, not one, but 2 Metroid titles were released. One of which was Metroid Prime, a game that brought Samus into the 3D realm and offered a unique gameplay experience with its emphasis on first-person exploration that went on to start something of a sub-series of the franchise that remains pretty beloved to this day. A very interesting set of games that deserves a Metroid Month all its own, so we'll get deeper into those titles next year. But the other game that hit store shelves at exactly the same time kept things a little more classic, electing for that 2D side-scrolling approach. But all the same, it offered a lot of irreparable changes to the hero of these games. That would be the game we're talking about today, so spoilers ahead, it's time to discuss Metroid Fusion for the Game Boy Advance. So something I'm sure a lot of Metroid fans remember about this game is that this is where games in the series started to lean into the narrative a bit more. There's a heavier reliance on dialogue exchanges here, and there's even a brief cutscene that plays before the title screen even appears, showing Samus having trouble flying her ship for one reason or another before crashing, leaving us with a very eerie version of the title theme. Once the game boots up, we get a little more context. Buckle in, because there's a little more to cover here than usual. Space pirates and Metroids are out of the way, so naturally the Galactic Federation is getting a little braver about exploring the cosmos again, sending a research team to planet SR-388, where there used to be Metroids until, you know, we happened. In an out-of-character move, though, the Federation actually makes a good decision by hiring Samus to accompany the team to the planet, but when they arrive, they find a group of indigenous creatures that have been infected by something called Parasite X. This creepy little slab of jello is capable of taking control of living organisms, even able to reanimate dead tissue and mimic the appearance of organisms they've infected. They spread fast and are incredibly dangerous, which is a big problem because the parasite attacks Samus, infecting her nervous system. That catches us up with the scene before, where she crashed crashed her ship because the parasite is killing her from the inside, and once her body is recovered, the Federation has to act quickly to save her. Because her Chozo armor is partly biological and is, in a way, part of her body, they have to surgically remove parts of it, but what they couldn't remove just kind of becomes a permanent part of her exoskeleton. That's when someone chimes in with a solution. After her mission on Zebes, Federation scientists were able to recover cells from the infant Metroid that was killed during the battle with Mother Brain, and they were able to create a vaccine that would integrate itself with Samus's DNA to fight the virus. It turns out the entire Metroid species was not a naturally occurring organism, but was actually created by the Chozo to serve as a predator to the parasite in hopes that the deadly Wiggle Wiggle could never make it off planet SR388, but since, you know, the parasite was able to thrive and multiply again. But now, with the Metroid vaccine becoming part of Samus's genetic makeup, she is now, for all intents and purposes, part Metroid, kind of making her what's left of the species. And now the parasite not only doesn't pose a threat to her anymore, but she can now absorb this stuff to empower her, making her the most effective weapon against this threat. Turns out they'll need her pretty quick too, because a research station orbiting SR388 where they sent the infected parts of Samus's armor is in trouble with some kind of explosion being caused there. Samus is sent out with a new ship and orders to investigate the facility, and let's just take a breather here for a second. So that is quite the info dump, sorry about that, but again, this game was trying harder than those preceding it to tell a story, and it does work for the most part, but that intro is kind of beefy, and honestly, it's a jarring way to start off this adventure. It really runs in contrast with what Super Metroid put forward. I mean, that game started off with a plot recap too, but there really wasn't as much to take in, and it definitely didn't take as long to get things moving. And at least that setup was still something that you could play through and experience for yourself, whereas here, you're sifting through blocks of text and still images to get the cliff notes on the events leading up to the main adventure. Now, a lot of this does pay off later, and anyone who knows me knows I love a game that can tell me a good story, but a game in and of itself is not a story, and the plot should serve as a complementary piece to the gameplay, not necessarily as the main course. I honestly think that statement is kind of opening up a huge can of worms that can spring off into a million different directions, so I guess I'll just sum it up by saying pacing is important, and Metroid Fusion really doesn't nail that in the beginning segment. Once you get to the BSL station, things feel a little off. You have this computer on your gunship that will chat with you at terminals around the facility and tell you what and where your objective is, giving you some direction as you proceed through the facility. Now, as Metroid games go, this is one that I hadn't returned to in a while, but I remember thinking that this was super railroady, but to my surprise, it really wasn't as bad as my memory made it out to be. Again, the beginning portions of the game see the computer throwing a lot of text at you to get you acquainted with the setting, but it does tone down a lot in the later portion, but this is also where the narrative elements start to really inform gameplay. First big thing that's introduced here is how upgrading and new weapons work in this game. When Samus had parts of her armor removed, it took away a good portion of her abilities, but a lot of the parasites now roaming this facility have mimicked those traits, weapons, and upgrades. As you travel through the station, you can see that there are tons of alien creatures from the surface of SR388 being cared for here, and that they've been infected by the parasite, and the more powerful creatures are infected with Core X parasites, larger versions of the life form that can take control of dangerous creatures and serve as the game's bosses. By beating the monsters they infect and their cores, you can obtain part of Samus's old abilities. What's more, the Galactic Federation tries to send Samus data over these upgrade rooms that will help you unlock her old abilities, but as the X starts to realize how she's been getting more powerful over the course of the game, you see them start to actively attack those upgrade rooms and steal the powers before she can get to them. An obvious sign that the parasite is frighteningly intelligent, but also just really cool from a game design aspect. They set up a really clear way of unlocking new items, but they take it away from you and make you fight for your life to claim them again. And I really do mean fight for your life, because this game does not pull any punches and you're gonna see your health bar plummet if you aren't careful. Every section of this station is fashioned to mimic the habitat of the alien creatures living on SR388, and the openings to these areas will grant you access to save stations and recharge terminals, and you do well to take advantage of them because the parasite-infected aliens on this ship aren't cutting Samus any slack. As for getting between these locations, well, the computer is always going to tell you what your next objective is and give you an idea of that destination, but sometimes reaching the goal isn't as obvious as it first looks. This game loves to set you off in the right direction and then drop obstacles in your way, so you have to be a little more creative about your progression, and I really love that. I had actually forgotten about how well the game sets up that kind of design. The bait and switch is something I really appreciate in this game, and it's something Fusion uses a lot. One of my favorite instances is where you're trying to make it to part of the ship to repair it, but suddenly the power goes out while you're on the elevator, forcing you to find a way around and bringing back those feelings of exploration and puzzle solving that Super Metroid introduced. But it all feels very novel here, fitting in seamlessly with the setting. That, and I just love when games take takes something like a transition screen you've seen a billion times and makes it suddenly not work the way it usually does to really knock you out of your comfort zone and test your ability to improvise. Even when you think you found a group of survivors, it actually turns out that it's just these little guys from Super Metroid who taught you the Shine Spark and wall jump. It's a shame they got away from an exploding planet only to end up here, but hey, they at least take safe refuge in your ship. By far, one of the coolest and most recognizable things the game throws at you, though, is a recurring enemy that you can't even fight. I mean, you face a lot of bosses in this game that all represent something you want to get back, like the morph ball, space jump, speed booster, stuff like that. Man, they throw some crazy stuff at you, like even a clone of Ridley for some reason. I mean, it's a cool fight and I love Ridley, but I logically don't understand how the parasite mimicked him. But the real kicker is this experiment called Nightmare. Like, jeez, guys. I thought the Crocomire thing was intense, but mashing missiles into Nightmare's mushy face as it melts and decays into a gross sludge is just on another level entirely. But far more frightening than any of those monsters you face is the SAX. Remember that the parasite infesting the station came from the infected armor removed from Samus at the beginning of the game, and now it's evolved into a monster that's mimicking our hero at her full strength. And considering the real Samus is part Metroid now, that makes the SAX even more deadly. The ability to absorb the X-Parasite is nice and all, and I like how it replaces the old health and ammo pickups from the old games as a method to integrate the story with the mechanics, but it also comes with the crippling weakness of the Metroid species, and that would be extreme cold temperatures. In places like this frozen part of the station, or areas where these ice-infused parasites roam, this poses a threat you have to work around, but where the SAX is concerned, the creature's ability to use Samus's ice beam means it can murder you in a matter of seconds. You cannot fight her. You will die almost instantly if you try, so in areas where the game has you crossing her path, you have to stay quiet and out of the way until she passes by, and considering how fast she can take you out if she sees you, it adds an insane level of tension to these moments. It really brings back the sci-fi horror roots of the series, and it's one of my favorite elements of the game. Constantly having to sneak around this terrifying monster, copying your most powerful abilities, and trying to find a way to build yourself up to take her down. And on your quest to grow more powerful, you'll sometimes gain access to abilities that the computer and the Federation weren't expecting you to be able to get, and it's here where you start to see the cracks in the direction the Federation has been giving you. Samus comments pretty early on in the game that something about the computer reminds her of her former superior officer, Adam Malkovich, a stern but ultimately caring man, at least according to this game, who Samus looked up to and who eventually sacrificed his life for hers, and she decides to refer to the computer by his name. This becomes more and more relevant as the AI speaking to her seems to show signs of sentience and acts slowly more and more like her former superior officer, but it's still quick to scold Samus when she takes things a step too far and flies in the face of the Galactic Federation's orders entirely and discovers a restricted area housing Metroids. The entire BSL station was designed as a way to propagate Metroids, using the same DNA salvaged to create the vaccine that saved Samus and raise them, presumably to use as biological weapons. Exactly like what the space pirates wanted to do. Samus doesn't have a lot of time to soak this in before the SAX comes in and tries to lay waste to the place as the lab gets decimated by the creature. Samus escapes, and that portion of the facility is removed from the rest of the station, destroying itself in the cold vacuum of space. The Adam computer explains that the Federation is pretty pissed that she found the lab and more or less wants to remove her from the picture. After seeing the terrifying potential of the parasites, including their ability to do whatever Samus can and even reproduce asexually, meaning there's actually like 10 other SAX lifeforms on the ship all hunting us down, they decide for some stupid reason they want to try to find a way to control the parasite and see it as more useful than the bounty hunter. After a little bit of protesting and persuading, the computer shows off enough humanity to confirm that it is, in fact, an AI based on the mind of Adam Malkovich and agrees to help Samus redirect the station to collide with planet SR-388 below, destroying the station, the planet, and Parasite X forever. Just before you make it to the control deck though, you finally face down with one of the SAX life forms and take it out before it grows into this Boglin reject. After killing that and destroying the core, the parasite still manages to escape, but there's no time to worry about that now. Samus sets the station to collide with the planet and sprints back to her ship? An Omega Metroid managed to escape the lab before it exploded, and man, it knocks you down to 1 health in a single hit. Oh wait, I've played Super Metroid, I see where this is going. The SAX pops in to fight the Omega Metroid, but is defeated pretty quickly, but not before getting a few good hits in, proving that this thing is still susceptible to the Ice Beam, and after absorbing the core, Samus is back at full strength and takes out the Metroid with ease. This is a fun scene, but something I can't ignore is how derivative it is of the ending of Super Metroid, and yeah, trying to emulate that feeling of the final boss is a worthy goal, but it doesn't really feel the same here, and I don't even understand why the SAX would attack the Omega Metroid at all. I get it hunting after a weaker version of Samus, but this thing is like its natural, or I guess unnatural predators, so whatever. Everything but Samus dies, and Adam instructs your little animal buddies on how to pilot the ship just enough to rescue Samus, who escapes just in the nick of time and reflects on the fact that she's destroyed 2 planets now, and the Galactic Federation and the universe at large are not going to be on her side here. I mean, the Federation will probably have a pretty easy time painting Samus as a terrorist and making her a public enemy, trying to cover their tracks for their illegal experiments on the BSL station. Sadly, we still don't know where the story goes from here. Even today, 18 years later, we still don't have a game that takes place after Metroid Fusion. And I mean, it's not for lack of trying. There was a game in the works, or at least rumored to be in the works, called Metroid Dread. It was supposed to center around Samus' struggle against the Galactic Federation, an organization that she used to work under and trust. But that project never really came to fruition. And it sucks because by the time I got to the end of playing this game, I was pretty interested in this part of the storyline. While this game does lean into its narrative maybe a little too much to the point where it does hurt the pacing of the game, it's still a really fun story, and the game still manages to introduce a lot of really cool ideas, moments, and gameplay structure that I really didn't come to appreciate until this most recent playthrough. I've really come to admire the way the game sets up what looks like a strictly linear adventure, only to pull the rug out from under you and open the way to that classic Metroidvania exploration, and play with the other tropes of the series in super fun ways, like how collecting items and even stuff like health and ammo in a really creative fashion. I started this playthrough kind of slogging through the text boxes, but by the end I was thrilled. I still need more practice with this one. I haven't gotten it down on the same level as like Super Metroid, but I'm excited to revisit this one, and honestly, because of the somewhat more streamlined nature of the gameplay, I think I could easily recommend this to newcomers trying to dip their toes into the franchise, just as long as they're okay with playing catch up on a plot element or two. So if there isn't another game taking place after Metroid Fusion, what's left to discuss this October? I don't even have a clever quip for this one. So we're gonna wrap up this first Metroid month by taking a look at the shame of the series, the enigma of misguided ideas, and the character assassination of one of the coolest women in gaming. So I hope you'll join me this Halloween as we take a look at Metroid Other M. And I don't even know if I'm ready for this one, guys. Until then, you can find me on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, whichever you prefer, links in the description, and of course, as always, spread the word, tell your friends, and until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching. See you next mission. Hello. Alright, we're done with that bit. I'm not doing that anymore. Anyway, back in my review of the original NES game, I mentioned that I didn't get into the Metroid series until my later teen years. In fact, it was about 10 years ago now when I logged onto the Nintendo channel on my Wii and saw this video.
My name is Samus Aran. I'm a bounty hunter. I work alone.
I had known about Metroid sort of offhand up to this point. Playing Samus as Smash Bros. 64 was more or less my first look at the series, but it wasn't until I saw this video that I was given a better context into that universe, and this was what really got me interested in the Metroid franchise. Yeah, an advertisement for Other M is what got me into Metroid. Of course, it made some level of sense. The production value for this game's advertising campaign was off the charts. Like, it was hard not to get excited for this, even if you weren't a Metroid fan. After seeing this, I wanted to catch myself up, so that's when I started playing the games that came out before, experiencing Samus's adventures for the first time. It's worth remembering that there were a few games that came out after Fusion, but before this title. The Metroid Prime series was very well received among Metroid fans, but definitely played very differently than the original games, going for a 3D first-person adventure approach. But Other M was something different. It was the first game in the series to take on a 3D structure from a third-person perspective, but was also adding in elements from the Prime series as well, and what's more, the Prime series felt like it had its own storyline going on, while this was jumping back into the storyline built up by the other games with a lot of influence from Super Metroid and even delving deeper into Samus's origins. This was a big deal to Metroid fans back in the day. A new title taking elements from the 2D games and melding them with the 3D ones, creating a unique experience, but we also had Yoshio Sakamoto, one of the co-creators of the franchise, returning to direct this. Everything was set for success. The stars were aligned and all was well, so what the hell went wrong here? Spoilers ahead. Let's get into it. Metroid Other M takes place somewhere before Metroid Fusion, but picks up right at the end of Super Metroid, where Samus is getting the old beat down from Mother Brain before being saved by the baby Metroid. We know how this goes. Mother Brain kills the baby, Samus gets the Hyper Beam and kills Mother Brain. It all just looks really shiny now, and I guess that's something worth pointing out now because it's immediately apparent, but yeah, this game is gorgeous. It's one of, if not the best looking games on the system, and everything, cutscenes or gameplay, looks stunning here. It's phenomenal. Once we pick back up with Samus after her mission from Super Metroid is complete, however, we see that not all the presentation in this game is perfect.
A dream. I had been reliving the tragic moments of my recent past.
So Samus has a voice now, and she uses it. A lot. She will monologue through every single cutscene, and it's all through this super robotic and emotionless voice. It's been pointed out before that this really isn't the actress's fault. Jessica Aaron Martin is not a bad actress, and she's done good work before, but this is how she was instructed to deliver her lines. This is what she had to do, and it sounds really bad. And I mean, Samus speaking isn't a problem. She's had stuff to say in text boxes before, and it's always been fine, but she's had a voice in Smash Brothers too.
Is that all?
Yeah, see? That's kind of what she should sound like. Samus goes on about how sad she is that the baby Metroid sacrificed itself for her, but there's no time for that. Now we gotta move on to the tutorial with this patronizing jerkwad talking to Samus like she has no idea what she's doing. Like, really, man? I killed an entire species. I just got back from blowing up a planet. I can handle... what is this? Problem number 2. This game was developed for the Wii, but despite the insane amount of controller options this console supports, the only method of movement you have in Other M is this. Just the Wii remote. Yeah, a small handful of buttons and, oh, a D-pad. Come on. This is the first third-person 3D Metroid game, and you want me to run around in these open environments with 8 directions of input? Man, it sure is a shame that the Wii didn't come packaged with some kind of accessory that just plugs into the back of the Wii remote and gives players access to an analog stick that would make movement in a 3D environment much easier. Oh wait, I remember an interview where Sakamoto said he wanted to use just the Wii remote so that it would be more easily accessible and everyone could understand the control scheme. Well, Super Mario Galaxy doesn't seem to have an issue utilizing the nunchuck, so you tell me Super Mario Galaxy is too difficult for general audiences to understand? Not to mention, the Metroid Prime games also used a nunchuck for movement, and it also worked so well in Prime 3 that they added this control scheme to the GameCube games when they were ported to the Wii for the Metroid Prime Trilogy collection. I really wish that I could say that this was the height of Sakamoto's poor decision making for this game, but it's not. So a word of note here, I definitely want to give credit to Team Ninja for their work developing this game. They had to jump through a ton of weird hoops to capture what Sakamoto was looking for, but they really did their best with it. This concept of using a D-pad in this kind of level structure is ridiculous, but they did make it feel as good as it possibly could. To help mitigate some issues that would normally arise from this sort of thing, firing your arm cannon has some pretty decent auto-aiming properties, so I didn't really have much trouble hitting the right enemy or anything like that, and honestly, one of my favorite new additions is melee combat. By dazing an enemy, you can run in, get up close, and take them out head on, and I love this feature. Samus is a super versatile and nimble character, so letting her use her fighting skills outside of just shooting things is something that probably should have happened a while ago, to be honest. Stuff jumps right back into being stupid, though, when trying to fire missiles. You can't go running around firing these things, instead you have to stop dead in your tracks, turn the Wii remote around so it's pointing towards the screen, and enter a first-person kind of view like the Prime games, and yes, this is the only way to fire missiles in Other M, and also, yes, it feels really jarring almost every time you have to stop and do it. This can be such a pace breaker, especially during boss fights and that sort of thing, but it's not the only time they're gonna force you to switch perspectives. During key moments of the narrative, Samus will have to stop and scan the area for some really specific clue concerning the plot before being able to do anything else, and you have to be like pixel perfect. I mean, right on top of the subject in question for this to work, and sometimes it's really not obvious what you're even supposed to be looking for. And that's not even mentioning the times when the story forces you into this over-the-shoulder camera angle where Samus has to saunter through these locations looking for something. Is this supposed to build tension? Because all it really does is just build frustration with the control scheme, and I already wasn't a fan. Speaking of that story though, we should probably get back into it because it's honestly hard to talk about the other problems with the way this gameplay is structured without getting into the events that surround it. Once Samus is done with her tutorial and gives her mission report, some time passes before she picks up a distress signal coming from a nearby Galactic Federation outpost known as the Bottle Ship. She says something about how the type of distress signal is codenamed Baby's Cry because
The nickname comes from the fact that the purpose of the signal is to draw attention.
Alright, answer me this, Samus. Have you ever, like at any point in your life, heard of any kind of distress signal that isn't explicitly designed to attract as much attention as possible? It's kind of what they're supposed to do. Well, she makes it to the bottle ship, but she's not alone because the Galactic Federation has sent a team there too, with some familiar faces among the crew as well. One of them is Anthony Higgs, an old friend from Samus's war days with the Federation, and the only likable character in this game. He's got a couple of fun lines here and there, and he's pretty much the only person in the cast having any fun. He's also the only person in the game treated with any, like, subtlety. Like, we know that he and Samus were friends back in the day, but rather than beating us over the head with that idea and getting long, drawn-out stories about their adventures, it's actually easy to tell that these guys are buddies just by watching them interact sometimes without even the use of words. It's almost like a visual medium gives you the tools necessary for portraying ideas and plot elements without forced monologues, rather than just stuff we can see with our eyes. I also like that while he jokes around with Samus from time to time, you can tell that it comes from a place of respect, and just look at this man's face. He loves showing off how awesome his best friend is to the rest of the team. So other than Anthony, we have a couple of Randys whose names and jobs I care absolutely nothing about because they might as well just be faceless drones, and Adam Malkovich. So remember that computer from Fusion, the one that Samus named Adam after her caring and respectful former commander from when she was in the Galactic Federation? Remember how she commented on how the computer acted more cold and calculating when compared to the real guy it was based on? Well, I hope her praise for this brave and selfless man didn't build up your expectations too high for the real deal, cause here he is, and he sucks! I'm trying to figure out how to tackle this particular aspect of the game, cause it brings up two major issues. I guess a good place to start would be what it does to the narrative of this game, and considering you can't skip these cutscenes and have to watch each one through to the end, it doesn't help that they're so unbearable. We know from Fusion that Adam was once Samus' superior officer when she served under the Galactic Federation, and that she looked up to him, but this game takes that a step further by explaining that he was something of a mentor and even a father figure to her. Did he console her when her troubling past came back to haunt her? Did he help her figure out what her place in the universe was and give her direction on how to gain control over her own motivations and feelings? Can't say for sure because the game really doesn't give us much insight on that. It just kind of tells us that we should care about this relationship. Samus just monologues about how he vaguely mentored her in the past and gave her the oh-so-eloquent nickname of Lady.
Any objections, lady?
Supposedly, while Samus would detest anyone else calling her this outright and take it as a sign of people looking down on her, she finds it dignified when spoken by Adam? Sure, yeah, that's totally the impression I get. At least when Anthony calls her princess, it still comes off as friends poking fun at each other, but everything that Adam says and does feels cold and distant. We never actually see what ties these characters together, we just hear about it, and it's one of the biggest issues with the story of this game, but it also greatly hinders the presentation. We learn that Adam had to make a tough call during a mission that managed to save his entire crew and the passengers of the ship they were sent to rescue, but resulted in the death of his younger brother. Samus was begging Adam to trust her to try to save him, and he wouldn't allow it, probably because he knew she would just end up getting killed. According to this game, this is what caused Samus to leave the Federation, and it damaged their relationship pretty significantly. I mean, Samus did have her family taken from her at a very early age, so I can understand her having strong feelings about someone she looked up to, from her perspective, just letting a family member go like that. Of course, Adam was in a position where he knew that trying to save his brother would mean getting them all killed and he would just die anyway, but I can also understand why this would tear the two apart and might be enough to make Samus leave. So with this rift now created between the two, Samus showing up with her own free will to this facility and running into Adam's team should make for an interesting interaction, and at first it does. Anthony seems happy to see Samus, but Adam gives her the cold shoulder, refusing to divulge information about their mission because she's quote-unquote an outsider. The Federation didn't ask her to be here, and she made a choice a while ago not only to leave the organization, but to leave him as well. We can see Samus takes this response a little harshly. Obviously, she doesn't like hearing him refer to her that way, but understands why he did. It's a good moment that visually showcases the strain that now exists between these two people that once were very close. Or at least it would have been, if it weren't for the narration.
The word he so obviously chose, outsider, pierced my heart.
Any cutscene in this game that could have carried some emotional weight and really resonated with the player is never given a chance because the game has no subtlety and doesn't trust the player to take the information given to them and put together a conclusion on their own. Anytime in this game that Samus encounters something that challenges her on any level, we have to sit through this high school fanfiction level writing that spells out exactly what she's feeling and why she doesn't like it, and rather than the intended effect of drawing us closer to the character and seeing her as more human, it makes her seem so much more alien and stilted, like she's trying to process what the sensation of of human emotions even are, and this forced narration ruins every single cutscene in the game. And because we really need to create even more distance between Samus and the player, we have the other problem that Adam brings to the table. After traveling a short while with the group, Samus helps them defeat some kind of monster, and Adam decides that it would probably be a good idea to recruit Samus for the safety of his team because, you know, she's a seasoned bounty hunter with a lot of tools at her disposal and the experience needed to utilize them effectively. So when bringing her on board, he naturally tells her that she can't use any of her weapons and upgrades until he tells her she can because, you know, she's a seasoned bounty hunter with a lot of tools at her disposal and the experience needed to utilize them effectively except for when she's around other people, I guess. What is this logic? Sir, have you even seen a fraction of the things that Samus has accomplished in Metroids 1, 2, and Super Metroid? And it's not even addressing everything that happened in the Prime games, but to be honest, I don't even know if this game acknowledges those, so I just kind of skipped them before tackling this mess. Samus knows what she's doing. Her entire biology was altered for the sole purpose of using this equipment, but sure, you know what's best, Adam. Can't have my space jump to make it over long stretches of terrain because that would just be too dangerous for some reason. Can I at least use my Varia suit so that the heat of this area you're telling me to run through doesn't literally kill me from exposure alone? No? Alright, yeah, that's fine. Let me just dodge bloodthirsty aliens and sprint through these lava-infested corridors. Let me just waltz through this place that's actively killing me every second I spend in it. But hey, like 15 to 20 minutes later, I somehow managed to get through all that.
Samus, activate the Varia feature on your suit to protect yourself from heat damage.
Alright, look, I know this series has some really dumb ways of taking away Samus's abilities early on so the player has something to collect, and there's still a sense of progression, except for Fusion. That game actually handled that really well. But that sacrifice in logic was made for a better gameplay experience because discovering and earning a more powerful state of being is half the appeal of these games, and oh boy, let me tell ya, nothing diminishes that feeling more than already having access to Samus's entire arsenal but not getting to use it until this Nimrod says so. The player has no agency over the use of their tools and abilities. It's all walled off from you until the game decides it's ready for you to use it, and now instead of feeling excitement or relief when you obtain new upgrades, it really just feels annoying because there's no reason I shouldn't have been able to use this beforehand. And I don't think the safety of the rest of the crew is a very good excuse when one, half the missions that Samus has been sent on also included the goal of locating Galactic Federation soldiers, so she already knows how to work around them, but two, they're just killing each other off anyway. Yeah, so after meeting up with Team Redshirt over here, the game discovers a research center that reveals that the Galactic Federation was using the bottle ship to not only raise and preserve a lot of alien species that once lived on planet Zebes, but were also experimenting on ways to create bioweapons.
In these facilities, life forms from each planet have been raised and researched as possible bioweapons.
Adam, was the Galactic Federation experimenting with bioweapons?
What are you, stupid?
The aliens roaming this facility could probably be excused as just trying to not let these species go extinct, with these habitats around the place meant to give them a sustainable recreation of the environment they once lived in, with some being recognizable enemies from Super Metroid and others being a little more original, like this little Furby-looking thing that starts stalking Samus. She doesn't really pay much mind until it somehow evolves into this creature and starts causing more issues all around the bottle ship. But we also start to see creatures like these Beastians outfitted with cybernetic enhancements that the Federation was presumably creating to use as bioweapons. This entire operation was being led by a woman named Madeline Bergman, so the mission now turns into finding and destroying this gross dude and seeing if Madeline is still alive and what information can be gathered from her. It actually does seem like some progress is being made here after Samus finds this girl who claims to be Madeline Bergman, but it's not. No, she's actually... She's someone else. And if you're thinking it's a clone of Samus or something, well, that was my first thought too, but it's not. It's somehow even dumber than that. Well, anyway, she reveals that, yeah, the Galactic Federation was using this facility to create bioweapons. Great, I already knew that. But she also lets us know that she saw one of the members of Adam's crew kill one of his own comrades, and this dude even tries to kill Samus before getting away. So what you're saying is, there's an imposter among us. So Samus decides to refer to this traitor as the Deleter, which Alright. And soon Adam chimes in to say that it's time to go kill that evolving creature from before. Neither of them seems to want to discuss this whole traitorous murderer though, and I cannot fathom why this discussion doesn't come up. Like, the only thing that actually makes sense to bring up, and it's the one thing no one has anything to say about. Samus does make it to the pyrosphere, where it looks like the creature has changed form yet again, and after some back and forth with Anthony in this really dark room and this mysterious shadow swooping around them, we finally see what's been following Samus around the entire game and causing half our problems. At this point, I'm ready for a cool boss fight with my favorite enemy in the game, but instead we need Samus to be distraught and caught up in disbelief for a moment. And I mean, yeah, I can see her going through that, but for this long? Like, she's stuck staring at this creature for a while, and then... Excuse me? Really? This is how you're handling this situation? You know what? People always bring up how much they hate the way Samus acts in this scene, and yeah, me too. It doesn't fall in line with what we know about this character at all. She already knows that there's a lot of cloning and bioweapon shenanigans going on here, but she's also fought and beaten this thing several times at this point, even if the Prime games aren't a factor. So I don't even find this reaction realistic. But I'm also confused by Ridley here. Like, what are you doing, dude? Just gonna stand there and yell at her all day, or are you actually gonna do something? Yeah, okay, there you go. That's what I thought.
Hey, Pop! Don't you know how to treat a lady? Man, you got no stuff!
Anthony, you are a light of hope in this dark void, and the only thing keeping me going right now. This is the scene people hate. Whenever people bring up Metroid Other M and how much it sucks, this is the moment that comes to mind, because the image of one of the coolest characters in the game industry is sabotaged so fast here, and it's downright insulting to see her characterized this way. I read in an article that a Nintendo representative said that people missed the point of this scene and that it wasn't about a moment of weakness for Samus, and rather one about strength. Oh yeah? You want to elaborate on that one, dude? Want to explain the strength side of Samus freezing and leaving herself in such a vulnerable position that it almost gets her killed and manages to result in the presumed murder of her best friend? Sorry. Wow, that actually took a lot out of my lungs. I don't even know if there's much more to say here. I mean, so many people have already discussed why this scene is just the worst, but we still have other things to get to, so let's just speed this up a little bit, because I don't know how much more I have left in me. After the Ridley battle, the big dude escapes because of course he does, but we also lose contact with Adam. This is where things start to get a bit better though. We get to use items when they become useful, there's no more constant interruptions, and even Samus starts to feel a little more likable after this.
Any objections, Adam?
Come on, where was this side of Samus the entire game? We eventually stumble into not Madeline again, who reveals that on top of everything else, the Federation also used cells recovered from Samus's armor to start a Metroid propagation program, and are you seeing it? Are you starting to see the similarities? The facility, created as an artificial habitat for creatures that lived on a planet that Samus had a previous mission on, the development of bioweapons that the organization is trying to cover up, being railroaded around the place under the orders of Adam, and now a secret lab on the ship containing Metroids? This game is just Metroid Fusion again, but bad. It also doesn't help that Other M takes place before Fusion, which makes all the revelations in that game seem like they should have been a lot more obvious now that we know that it's all happened before this, but yeah, this game just takes everything from Fusion and makes it worse. I mean, look, they even brought Nightmare back in, and it is just as disturbing as before. I wish the Metroid lab section was at least as cool in this game, but we never even get to go inside. Samus is attacked by Adam, and almost killed by this baby Metroid that was just vibing right outside the lab, and then that gets killed by Adam, who reveals that the only way to get rid of the lab is to destroy it from the inside so it'll launch itself away from the bottle ship and blow itself up in the cold vacuum of space. Sound familiar? This is that heroic sacrifice Adam made. He incapacitated Samus so he could destroy the lab, giving up his life to save the galaxy, and honestly, I don't even think that this scene is all that bad, but it sure would have meant a lot more if I liked him, but this is the only scene of the game that he isn't a complete jerk. Well, just about everyone is dead now. Even this guy, who, James, who turned out to be the deleter, so yeah, I guess that whole plot thread is done now, but we eventually make it to the research area where we find the real Madeline, who thinks that we came to kill her, so she sicks a Queen Metroid on us because yeah, sure, I guess we're doing that again. After killing the Queen, we chat with Madeline, who tells us that the other girl that we spoke with before was actually an artificial life form controlled by an AI based on Mother Brain. Yes, the Galactic Federation wanted to find a way to control the monsters they created, including the Metroids, so they created a Mother Brain clone, but decided it was a bad idea. Yeah, it probably was. And when they tried to get rid of her, she of course used the creatures that the Federation created to kill everyone on the facility, and now is trying to fly the ship to the Galactic Federation headquarters to get revenge. And somewhere in there's this whole thing about Madeline acting like a mother to MB, cause no, really guys, this game has a theme, trust me. Other M, mother, get it? Guys, do you get it? MB shows up, someone puts the brakes on the ship to stop it from reaching its destination, the Federation also shows up, MB gets pissed and summons a climactic set piece, you aim at her and the game is over. Madeline takes the shot to freeze MB, who's gunned down by the Federation. Anthony apparently survived, so at least there's one good thing that came out of all of this. And everyone leaves. You know what, actually real quick, props to this one moment right here. There's this grouchy old Federation general who commends Samus on her work, but as soon as she tries to speak with Madeline again, he shoots her down with the outsider thing again, and yeah, I can totally see how an organization like this would be super open and welcoming to her when they can benefit from her work, but want nothing to do with her otherwise. It's one of the few ways that they expand the universe in this game that I actually think adds a little depth. I guess that's technically not everything though, because once the credits are done rolling, you return to the bottle ship before the Federation destroys it so you can collect Adam's helmet that was left behind, and it's kind of the best part of the game. You can explore and clean up any of the collectibles you didn't grab before with no interruptions. There's a secret boss fight with Van Toon, and it's almost starting to feel like a real Metroid game. Until you find the helmet, a self-destruction sequence starts, and you run back to your ship as Samus in her Zero Suit. Why is she in her Zero Suit for this section? Why indeed. I really wasn't trying to make this video so long, but there's so much to discuss. There are so many problems with this mess of a game, and that's still me probably overlooking a couple of things, but it's really no wonder as to why people often refer to this as the worst thing that's ever happened to the series, and yeah, it did kind of kill the franchise for a little while there. The overhauled gameplay structure that stripped away rewarding progression, the ham-fisted story that was just a worse version of the game that it wishes it could be, and the portrayal of Samus obviously didn't resonate with players when the game came out. And up till then, Metroid was probably enjoying the height of its popularity. The Prime games really managed to breathe new life into the Metroid franchise, and Other M just took it all away in one fell swoop. Are there redeeming qualities to this game? Yeah, I mean, sure, there are, and I tried to point them out when they came up, but those that do exist are just drowning in terrible choices and awful structure. At the end of the day, unless you really just want to laugh at it or be baffled for some reason, there's really no reason to pick up Metroid Other M. I am not the only person that's made a video about Other M, far from it, and there's plenty of other people on this site that have done it way better than me, but this was my takeaway from it, and I hope you at least enjoyed watching me suffer. Of course, there are plenty of other great things about this franchise to talk about. I mean, the Metroid Prime games alone, but they deserve their own Metroid Month, so I will give them that next October and hope to see you there when I tackle them. But for now, I need a little break, okay? I think I'm gonna take like a week off of YouTube and recharge a little bit, but I will be back, and I'll be back soon, I promise. So everyone, thank you so much for making my first Metroid Month something that's really special to me. I will be back to make more soon, but until then, you can find me on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, whichever you prefer, links in the description, and of course, as always, spread the word, tell your friends, and until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching. See you next mission.
Hey there everyone, and thank you so much for watching. This is something that I was kind of wondering if I should do for a while, and I decided to just go ahead and take a crack at it. I am a big fan of nice, long-form content. I had this entire marathon already done and ready to go. Just thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and just get everything nice and packed in here. Just one big Metroid Month 2020 video, and I'm planning on doing the same thing for 2021's Metroid Month later on in a couple of weeks. So so I hope that you are also looking forward to that. Believe me, I wish I could be spending so much more time on videos and on this channel and everything, but my job as a manager in a retail location does unfortunately have to come first, and that takes up a lot of my time and energy, especially over the holidays. But I figure that this is a good way to keep the almighty YouTube algorithm happy while I'm just getting everything situated on this end and getting some more content ready to go, while at the same time just kind of taking it easy and catching my breath a little bit before jumping back into the fray. I do have a lot of fun stuff planned for this year, and I hope that you're looking forward to it, because I know that I certainly am. Of course, I wouldn't get to do any of this if it wasn't for the support of viewers like you and my Patreon supporters. Thank you all so much, and a huge shout out to my current top tier patrons. This month they are Brendan Hess, Christine Larkin, Earl Valco, Jeremiah Harrison, Jonathan, Mackenzel, Mr. SP, Wonton Photo, Nicholas Morgan, Patricia Marcoux, and Cirrus the Skeptic. Thank you guys once again. You make it possible and you make it worth it. With all of that said, there's still plenty of fun stuff on the horizon and a lot of work to be done. I'll get cracking on that, and I'll see you next mission.